So everyone's been clamoring about the new Marvel Rivals game that just came out recently, and I've been hearing nothing but praise from pretty much everybody playing the game. People have been saying that the art style is amazing, that the game is extremely free to play friendly, and that the game is a fantastic breath of fresh air. And I can see why they would say this because people have been fiending for a new hero shooter to take over Blizzard's chokehold on the market that they've had for so many years now. Some individuals are even going so far as to say that Marvel Rivals is going to be the next Overwatch killer, and that's where I disagree. Don't get me wrong though. I think Marvel Rivals is a terrific game. I've been having a bunch of fun with it so far, and it totally deserves the praise that it gets. But let's be honest here, it's not going to be the next Overwatch killer, and it never will be, because you can't kill what's already dead. Okay, if you want to be pedantic, Overwatch isn't actually dead. It technically still has a decently healthy player base for a live service game, but in the eyes of the public opinion, it may as well be dead because Blizzard has pretty much run the game into the ground. For years now, Overwatch has been the king of hero shooters, and no other game has ever even come close to dethroning it. Trust me, many games have tried to take the crown, but none of them have ever had that special X factor to really set itself apart from Overwatch and really carve its own little corner in the hero shooter genre. For example, you may or may not have heard of this little title called Paladins, which came out the same year as Overwatch did, and it was a pretty decent hero shooter overall that did a lot of things right. But unfortunately, since it was released just a few months after Overwatch, it was seen as a shameless derivative to the general audience, even though Overwatch itself was also a derivative of Team Fortress 2. But the thing is that Overwatch was way more popular than any other hero shooter at this point because it simply appealed more to the average gamer, or the normie audience if you will. If Overwatch was the iPhone of hero shooters, then Paladins was the cheap Chinese version that you get from Temu. Ironically enough, Overwatch would actually get dethroned by a Chinese game, but I digress. Every idea that Paladins had was always compared in some way to Overwatch because at the time, people saw it as the better game. And I mean, I don't blame them because that was when Overwatch was actually at its peak. The game was at the height of its glory days and the fanbase was the strongest it's ever been. That's not to say that Paladins was a bad game because it wasn't, it just came out the wrong time, and I truly do believe that if it were to release right now where the Overwatch sentiment is at its lowest, then the game would have fared much better. And that's only one example of a game that tried to capitalize on the hero shooter trend after Overwatch made its big debut. There are a ton of other titles that try to make it into this genre, but most of them never really saw any real long-term success because Overwatch was just taking up so much space that nothing else really saw the light of day. And it probably would have stayed like that if it weren't for Blizzard's own greed and gross mismanagement. You see, Marvel Rivals becoming popular was due to a variety of factors that caused the stars to align. However, more importantly though, it proved that it's not impossible to release a successful hero shooter in this day and age because people have been looking for the next big Overwatch killer for the longest time. But who knew that the big Overwatch killer that everyone was looking for was under their noses the entire time? It was none other than the creators themselves, Blizzard. You see, this wasn't an instant mass exodus of people that all of a sudden dropped Overwatch once Marvel Rivals came out. This was more of a gradual resentment that's been building up for a really long time now, and the players were just looking for anything to save them from the sinking ship. This resentment has been building up ever since the Overwatch 1 days due to the questionable handling by Blizzard that just made the game feel really stale and boring to play. Blizzard really did not like the short time to kill that Overwatch had, so they systematically nerfed a lot of the damage on many of the heroes, causing the game to become much more of a slugfest. For example, what many players consider to be one of the worst metas in Overwatch history was the GOATS meta, essentially where your team composition consisted of 3 tanks and 3 healers. That's right, there were no damage dealers on this team comp because the tanks and healers could do their job, but better. This composition allowed for the players to essentially play really aggressively while being nearly unkillable at the same time. This strategy was so effective and so easy to perform that it dominated the Overwatch meta for a very long time, causing the meta to feel really stale. Blizzard would eventually add a role queue to alleviate the issue, but at that point the damage had already been done and the people had already left in droves. Not only was this strategy boring to play, but it was also boring to watch as a spectator because nobody was dying, so games would just become one big stalemate. This caused viewership to massively decline and eventually led to the official shutdown of the Overwatch esports league. Now contrast that with Marvel Rivals, where it felt like the early days of Overwatch, where every character felt strong and had their own potential for a pop-off moment. Each of the heroes in Marvel Rivals has their own sort of ability or playstyle that makes them feel completely overpowered in the right hands, and it just feels like a breath of fresh air for the disaffected Overwatch players. And not only did the GOATS meta absolutely wreak havoc within the Overwatch community, but also Blizzard's lethargic and negligent update cycle pretty much killed all interest in the game itself. Now, I'm not saying that Blizzard should have been releasing updates every other week like Riot does, but Blizzard would go on for months and months on end without even so much as addressing the community's concerns. And when they did update the game, they would add very minuscule changes that lacked enough content to keep the average Overwatch player engaged for the next dry spell, usually in the form of recycled events and a handful of skins. And of course, this was another major reason why so many players started to leave Overwatch. Now, I'm not saying that Marvel Rivals is never going to get to this point, because it still very well could. But I'm just saying that right now, the game is in an incredibly fun state like how Overwatch was when it first launched. Now, even though Overwatch was already on the decline for many years already, none of this stuff would even be nearly as damaging as the event that completely decimated Overwatch's chances of ever making it back into the good graces of the public eye. This event was pretty much the akin to the Fire Nation attacking for the Overwatch community, the event known as the launch of Overwatch 2. Blizzard had promised a great deal of things for the sequel: better balancing, more heroes, more maps, an entire PvE mode meant to flesh out the lore of Overwatch. This was supposed to be Blizzard's great revival, the messiah that restored the Overwatch community back to the golden age of Overwatch 1. Undoubtedly, all of this stuff on paper sounded really enticing because people have been asking for a lot of these features for a very long time, especially a PvE mode or a story mode. And everyone was absolutely hyped for Overwatch 2 to launch and waited with bated breath. Now fast forward to the launch of Overwatch 2, and what should have been a momentous occasion for the community was met with a lot of confusion and skepticism because when players got their hands on it, they would find out that most of the heroes have been completely reworked, the generous loot box system was replaced with a greedy monetization, heroes were now locked behind a paywall, and no PvE was anywhere to be found. And worst of all, it completely replaced Overwatch 1, so you couldn't even go back and play that game if you wanted to. Overwatch 2 was essentially just one big glorified balance patch update that added battle passes. And people were rightfully confused because the big feature that Blizzard used to market Overwatch 2 was completely absent from the game, with the promise of it being released quote-unquote soon. So the community stuck it out, patiently waiting for this magical PvE experience to rescue them, only to find out a couple years later that Blizzard would be fully canceling it. That was the final straw for everybody because they were strung along for years on end, only for that very glimmer of hope to be dashed out of existence. That was when the community retaliated and left the game for good, leaving scathing reviews on the Steam page as a last parting gift. And now Overwatch 2 is a hollow shell of what Overwatch 1 was, and the player base is slowly dwindling day by day. And now that Marvel Rivals has come out, many of the disgruntled Overwatch players have jumped ship to that game. Despite what many people believe, Marvel Rivals never killed Overwatch. Blizzard did. No doubt a lot of the popularity for the game came from how good it actually is, but I also believe that was because it came out at just the perfect time and place. But that's just me. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know down below and make sure to like, comment, subscribe for more content in the future. See ya.